The mop bucket hit the marble floor with a crash that silenced the entire grand ballroom. Every head turned, every jaw dropped, and Mara Voss stood in the center of it all, wearing a faded gray uniform 2 sizes too big, her hair pulled into a messy bun beneath a plastic cap, pretending she hadn't just made the most expensive entrance of her life. She bent down slowly, gathering the scattered cleaning cloths with steady hands, even as her heart thundered beneath the ugly uniform. Around her, the cream of Harrington City's elite senators, hedge fund managers, socialites in designer gowns, watched with curled lips and barely concealed amusement. Someone snickered. A woman in a red Valentino dress leaned toward her companion and whispered something that made them both laugh. Mara kept her face neutral. Good, let them laugh. That was the whole point. 27 years old, sole heir to the Voss property group, a real estate empire valued at $4 billion, and she was pushing a mop bucket through the Harrington Grand Hotel's annual charity gala, wearing borrowed shoes that pinched her toes. Her grandmother had arranged this blind date. Her grandmother, who still believed love could be found at curated social events with background-checked men and chilled champagne. Mara had other ideas. She had done this before, not this dramatically, not with a mop bucket, but she had arrived underdressed, unimpressive, deliberately ordinary, and watched men's interest evaporate the moment they realized there was no flash of wealth to chase. Tonight was supposed to be no different. She would make the act so convincing, so humiliating, that whatever man had agreed to this date would take one look, make his apologies, and leave. Then she could go home, eat noodles in peace, and tell her grandmother the date simply hadn't worked out. Simple plan, clean exit. Except for the man now crouching beside her on the floor. Mara froze. He had appeared from nowhere, dark blazer, quiet eyes, no urgency, and he was picking up the scattered cloths beside her without a single word, folding them neatly before placing them back into her cart. He didn't look around to see who was watching. He didn't make a show of it. He simply helped. "You don't have to do that," Mara said, keeping her voice flat. "I know," he said. He handed her the last cloth and stood. "Are you all right?" She looked up at him properly for the first time. His name, she would later learn, was Daniel Osei. He had calm eyes and the kind of unhurried manner that made you feel like he had nowhere more important to be. He was not what she had expected. She wasn't sure what she had expected, someone flashier, probably. Someone who fit inside this room. Daniel didn't look like he fit inside this room either. "I'm fine," she said, standing. "Thank you." He nodded once and walked back toward a corner table. Not the VIP section, she noticed. Not the center of the room where her grandmother's connections usually positioned their chosen candidates. Just a small table near the window, where a glass of water sat untouched. Mara stared after him longer than she intended. Then she remembered she was supposed to be working. She pushed the cart toward the far wall and watched him from a distance. He didn't mingle. He didn't perform. A woman approached him, stunning, silk dress, practiced smile, and he was polite but disengaged. He spent more time looking at his phone than at the room. Not in the distracted way people did when they were bored, but in the focused way someone looked when they were working on something that actually mattered. Mara moved closer. If you're watching this and you've ever wondered whether the people testing others are sometimes being tested themselves, stay with us. Hit the subscribe button and keep watching, because this story is just getting started. She staged a second accident near his table, a small spill, nothing dramatic. He looked up immediately, already half out of his seat. "Please, I've got it," she said. "Are you sure?" "Yes," she wiped the surface slowly, buying time. "You're not with anyone tonight." He glanced around the room briefly. "I was supposed to meet someone, but I think she may have been delayed." A small pause. "Or decided this wasn't worth her time." Mara almost laughed out loud. She had been standing 3 feet from him for the last 20 minutes, and he had no idea he was already on the date. "Must be frustrating," she said carefully. Not really. He turned the water glass slowly between his palms. If someone would rather be somewhere else, it's better to know early. She studied him sideways. You don't seem bothered. I've learned not to expect much from these things. He said it without bitterness, just a quiet matter-of-factness that caught her off guard. People usually show up as something other than themselves. Mara said nothing. The evening moved strangely after that. She found excuses to stay near his section. He, for his part, never tried to impress her. He talked about a school his organization had recently helped in the rural parts of the country, a village where children had been walking 6 miles each way just to sit in a classroom with broken windows. He talked about it the way people talked about something they loved, with the kind of specific detail that couldn't be faked. He never once mentioned money. He never once looked at the room, the way people looked at rooms when they were calculating their position in it. And when a heavy-set man in a pinstriped suit paused near their section and told Mara sharply to move her cart out of the walking path, using a tone that suggested she was furniture, Daniel turned slowly and said, in the quietest, most unbothered voice she had ever heard, "She's doing her job. Perhaps you could do yours and walk around." The man blinked, looked between them, walked away. Mara gripped the handle of her cart and said nothing for a long moment. "You didn't have to do that," she said finally. "I know," he said again. She was still processing that when the evening broke open. The event host, a large, cheerful man named Gerald, who coordinated charity galas and had once made the mistake of telling Mara's grandmother a secret, climbed onto the small stage at the front of the hall and tapped his microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, before we proceed to the auction, I want to take a moment to welcome one of Harrington City's most distinguished philanthropists, a woman who has quietly funded 3 of the shelters represented by tonight's auction lots. Many of you may not recognize her in her current." He squinted toward the back of the room, found her face, and his expression shifted into something caught between awe and confusion. "Current attire, but please join me in welcoming Ms. Mara Voss." The room turned, and turned, and turned again. 1 second of silence. Then the eruption, not applause, not at first, just the cascading wave of recognition moving through the crowd like electricity through water. The woman in the Valentino dress actually dropped her champagne flute. The man in the pinstriped suit went the color of old paper. Mara didn't move. She stood beside her cart in her faded uniform and looked at the room looking at her. And then she looked at Daniel. He wasn't scrambling. He wasn't recalculating. He was watching her with those same calm eyes, and there was something in them she could not immediately name, not surprise, not triumph, just a kind of quiet recognition, as if something he had suspected had simply been confirmed. "You knew," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yes," he said. The noise of the room dropped away. She moved toward his table, abandoning the cart entirely now. "How long?" "Before tonight," he said simply. "I read the business profiles. I recognized your eyes in the photographs." He looked at her steadily. "I wanted to meet you, not the heiress, not the woman in the headlines. I wanted to see what you were actually like." Mara stared at him, and, "You're exactly what I suspected," he said. "Someone who's been disappointed so many times she decided to stop being findable." She had no answer for that. The room was still buzzing around them. People were approaching, flustered apologies, nervous laughter, hands extended in sudden warmth. Mara ignored all of it. She kept her eyes on Daniel. "You said you run a nonprofit," she said. "The Osai Foundation, yes." Something clicked in her memory, cold and sudden. "The Osai Foundation," she said it slowly. "You rejected a $30 million grant from Voss Properties 8 months ago." "We did." "Why?" Daniel's expression didn't waver. "Because attached to that grant were development plans that would have displaced 400 low-income families in the Lewiston district. We don't take money that comes at that cost." Mara felt something cold slide through her chest. She had known about the Lewiston project in broad strokes. Her father's old executives had handled the details, men who had been running her company's expansion strategy since before she took full control. She had signed documents. She had not asked enough questions. She stood in the middle of the Harrington Grand Hotel in a cleaning uniform, while the full weight of that landed on her. "I didn't know the specifics," she said quietly. "I believe you," he said. "That's actually why I agreed to tonight." The next 4 months moved like a storm she had chosen to walk into. Mara pulled every Lewiston file. She hired 3 independent auditors. What they found was worse than displacement. There were falsified environmental assessments, payments to city officials, and a paper trail that led directly to 4 senior executives who had been running a shadow operation beneath her name for years. She did not quietly manage the situation. She did not let lawyers handle it in back rooms. She took the evidence to the authorities herself. The trial was public. The coverage was relentless. Her family's name absorbed damage that would take years to repair. But the Lewiston family stayed in their homes. The falsified documents became Exhibit A in a prosecution that sent 2 executives to prison. And through all of it, Daniel showed up. Not with fanfare, not with statements for the press. He showed up the way he had shown up on that first night, quietly, practically, already doing the work. He connected Mara with community organizations. He helped the Voss Foundation restructure its grant framework so that local residents had a voice in every project that affected them. He never once said he told her so. And she never forgot that. If this story is hitting different, now is a good time to like the video and drop a comment below. What did you think about Daniel's move on that first night? We want to hear from you. 7 months after the gala, on a Tuesday morning in the Lewiston Community Garden that now sat where a luxury tower was never built, Daniel handed Mara a small envelope. Inside was a photograph, grainy, slightly blurred, taken by someone across the ballroom, of a man in a dark blazer crouching beside a woman in a gray cleaning uniform, folding cloths on the floor of a grand hotel. Beneath the photograph in his handwriting were 4 words. "I saw you first." She looked up. He was already on one knee. The wedding happened on a warm Saturday in the Lewiston Community Garden, surrounded by the families who had stayed. There was no grand ballroom, no designer gowns, no curated guest list. There was food and noise and children running between the chairs and a grandmother in the front row who cried before the ceremony even began. On a small table at the entrance, guests passed a framed enlargement of that grainy photograph, a woman with a mop cart and a man kneeling beside her on the floor. The disguise designed to end everything had, in the end, revealed everything that mattered. And the only person who had seen through it from the very first moment had also been the only one worth finding. If you made it to the end of this story, you already know what to do. Subscribe, share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and tell us in the comments. Would you have had the courage to do what Mara did? We'll see you in the next one.